I'm Lucas,
And I'm Russell.
and you're listening.
To Sadboi Podcast.
Yeah, Sadboi.
Sadboi Podcast. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the Sadboi Podcast. This time we have a guest in our episode. After a while,
Yes, we do. We do.
been a while.
This guy who's been messaging me a lot about coming on the podcast because he wants to share his great insight on certain serious political topics.
Invitation. It was an invitation.
Why don't you just introduce yourself?
Okay. So we have a guest called. His name is Anthony Ho.
He refers to himself as Anakin Skywalker for some reason.
Yes. Yeah. So you can introduce yourself a little bit, Anthony.
There's not much to say. I'm just pretty linked to the political topics that we're about to be speaking about, family and such. I have a background in political science, studied that in undergrad at the University of Toronto. So I've also studied extensively, I'd say, probably into the Communist Party in the modern times. So after Mao, up until their opening under Deng. And yeah, Chinese politics kind of interests me sometimes. Most of the times, especially in relation to Taiwan, Hong Kong. No, Chinese politics. Chinese politics. Yeah, in relation to Taiwan, Macau, and Hong Kong, and all the Asian neighbors, and how it affects us over here in the West as well.
Yeah.
Nice.
So basically, Anthony is someone who is probably one of the more rational political people I know or we know. Because I think there's a lot of people who are political, but they're very focused on their side and they aren't really willing to discuss or debate. But Anthony is someone who has been willing to listen to the other side and all that stuff. See, look, I'm not roasting you. I'm literally complimenting you.
Yeah, we haven't roasted him yet. It's fine.
I know. I literally just complimented you.
It's just my motto.
Yeah, because I remember when the whole protesting started last year, right? Like me and Anthony would be like, screw the Communist Party. We used to say all that stuff, and then now Anthony has become more rational. He's to the point where someone actually called him a sympathizer for the Communist Party.
No, I think I've always been like that. It's just when emotions are high, we all tend to stand our ground and
we tend to react.
Yes, we tend to react.
Yeah.
So that's our reaction. But then when we actually discuss things civilly, there's a different part of ourselves that we engage in. So
for sure.
Yeah.
So how about you start off and kind of give as brief as you can a history of how these Hong Kong protests came to be, because I'm pretty sure you know this way more than us.
How they came to be. So I would probably have to say that it just started off probably before the handover. That would be probably right when the Tiananmen incident happened in 1989. That's when people were actually afraid. A lot of people were actually kind of happy to to return to be governed by people that looked like us, for the most part, because of how racist the British and white imperialism was.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it started there. Mostly about a democratic China was their protest aims. And then as soon as the handover occurred, most people who grew up under the British, and also those who were born after the handover, started to more associate themselves with Hong Kong. Hong Kong became more than just a place where people just came from other places. It became a home where people actually felt like they belonged there, that it was theirs, and not just a place they were just traveling to, and then like a stepping stone. And then I'd probably say the first large gathering was probably when they tried to implement Article 23. I believe that was in 2001.
That sounds like Star Wars, man. Execute Order 66.
But that was the first time they mass rally in the streets. It was basically a law that basically asked the government of Hong Kong that they would, by themselves, enact laws that would target secessionist movements and those types of people, like people who would support independence, people and groups that would hurt the national security of the country. And then that would lead down to several years. I would say I've probably just kind of chill times because they did shelve it. They didn't actually go on with it. And then the chief executive at that time stepped down, citing health issues. And then, like I said, chill times up until I'd probably say around 2014. That's when the Umbrella Revolution or Umbrella Movement.
Yeah, that I
Yeah.
kind of
Started
briefly
happening.
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's mostly the one I remember as well. So.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest one because of how they clashed with the police, and that was the first time that the protest became violent between two entities, so the governments and the people. So
But
that
it
was
never
probably the biggest one.
escalated to like this point, right?
No, but it did escalate to it escalated to usage of tear gas. Probably not as much as they did last year,
yeah.
but they did tear gas the people. There was some police brutality, but definitely not to the scale that we saw from last year until now. But that was the first in the yellow and blue camps that was divided. The yellow camp being the ones that are pro-democracy, wanting more freedom and autonomy and right to vote and elect our own leaders and our legislature. Sorry, and then the blues were the ones who felt that we didn't need such, I guess, changes. It's a mixed bag. Both sides are pretty mixed. Some of them were fairly pro-police. It mixed together pro-police and the blue side to those who just felt like these people are just causing trouble. So then after that, the next major event would probably be 2016. They called it the fishball revolution. That one was it was because this was led by the localists, which were very pro Hong Kong. They were basically just defending the hawkers, which are people who sell street foods, I guess, on the streets of Hong Kong, and they were trying to protect that culture. And I think it was during the New Year's, Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year. They were trying to protect that type of, I guess, celebration culture. And then the cops stamped them out. The cops came and they raided the place, and then they were basically pushing back. And that was the first time they pushed back against cops violently. Edward Leung was the first person who that's actually where the Revolution of Our Times slogan came from originally. So he said it there. And then from then onwards, he was known as a separatist, or labeled as a separatist. And from that moment on, I would say that that's when separatism was an idea amongst the public. Not like a very popular idea, but it's still something that was talked about. It was finally something that people considered or felt like was needed. And then after that, I didn't die down, but there was a little here and there. But then what really happened was after Edward was arrested and imprisoned and convicted of rioting. So he's in jail now. So he's in prison for about, I think it was 10 years. So he's still...
China?
No, in Hong Kong. So he's still sitting that one out. I don't think we've heard much from him. He's safe, as far as we know. But that's, I think, what pushed a lot of young, university-aged students to go and do politics. And that's why there's that sprung up a lot of political groups that were called localists. They could range from being pro-democracy to separatists. But largely they were umbrella term for those that were basically pro-Hong Kong, which is the most general I can put it. And then that would bring us now to 2019. In between, there were some disqualifications of some lawmakers that were localists. That's something that happened in between those years. But the major event would be then 2019, where they tried to push the Extradition Law, which led to the protests and then greater demands for democracy and basically the same demands as 2014, where they failed. They tried to do things different this time in 2019. Instead of holding places, they would move around the region, different districts and towns and cities. They would move around to basically make the cops do more than they had to try and stop them, to tire them out. And then that would basically bring us to COVID times and 2020 now, with also the new national security law enacted in Hong Kong roughly around the fall of 2020.
Yeah.
And now we're
So
here.
how would you like explain what the extradition law was? Yeah.
To put it bluntly, and from a legal standpoint, there's nothing wrong with having an extradition law between two countries or two entities. Okay, so the issue isn't having an extradition treaty or agreement with China now. So that's not the issue. The issue is simply having one with a country whose judicial systems are not the most respected, the most, I guess, trustworthy, the most just you can't really trust most of the judgments coming out of the Chinese courts, especially when it comes to crimes that pertain to national security or anything political crimes. And so that's where the issue was. And not to mention, China has the death penalty, while Hong Kong does not. So any drug-related issues is also something that is troublesome. Just like Canada. Canada has a treaty with China. Or sorry, actually, I'm not sure if they do. I have to look into that. But the point is that they have to, if we have someone to send back to China for, to face their trial, we have to have at least a guarantee from China, who has the death penalty, that they will not be subjected to any, cruel and inhumane treatments, which death and torture is one, are some of them, and it's not uncommon that those types of people are tortured or maybe put to death, especially when it comes to drug-related and political issues. So that's where the issue is. The extradition law is a law that was trying to get Hong Kong to be able to send people back to China for trial. It's very simple in that sense, but it really came about because Hong Kong had, I believe, one of the citizens in Taiwan with his girlfriend, who then murdered his girlfriend in Taiwan, but Taiwan could not extradite them back to Hong Kong because, to be tried. So, because they didn't have an extradition treaty. So this treaty was trying to cover the grounds between Hong Kong and Taiwan, but also China as well. And that's what people got upset about, was the ties with China and how that would affect possible, I guess, extraditions in the future with any sensitive allegations of crimes by the Chinese government. So that's as basic as I can put it. I didn't read if they've amended it or not, but I know they tried to.
Like you're the most up to date with the current situation right
I'll
now.
be honest. Recently, I haven't been paying attention. I think also it's just been very COVID related stuff. I think the extradition law has been. I think it's still being talked, just not very public about it. And I think they're more concerned now with stomping out any dissidents and political protests at the moment to do any of that. Or at least, I guess they wanted to just quiet down the people before they reintroduce it, which I'm sure they'll reintroduce it. Because technically, the national security law that was implemented recently was something that they shelved back in 2000s. So it's basically what the Chinese government wanted Hong Kong to enact it themselves. But since it's been taking so long, China basically did it themselves. That's what basically happened. So Article 23 is basically whatever this national security law was, except it just came from a different place. It didn't pass through Hong Kong's legislature. It came from China's constitution. they added that into the constitution, which directly affects Hong Kong at that point.
Yeah, so they're basically just forcing their hand.
They
into
forced
Hong
it
Kong.
through, they forced it into Hong Kong because Hong Kong was taking too long to enact it themselves within the basic law, which is under, the legislation process of the Hong Kong government and courts. So because it took so long, they're like, screw it, we're just going to do it ourselves through the Constitution, and it will apply to you because it's literally made to apply to Hong Kong anyway. Yeah. It was just a different avenue of applying it. But the extradition law, that's what it was. It was just, there's nothing wrong with having one. It was just wrong to have one with a country with such poor human rights.
See, that's the confusing thing, right? Because, I think most of us agree that China has one of the worst human rights in the world, and yet they're on the UN Human Rights Council.
Well, that's an issue that I also have. I guess I don't enjoy seeing that. I don't enjoy seeing that as well. I don't think it's right, but that's an issue of the UN, and difficult. It's very difficult to say how and why they're even on there. I personally, if based just on reality, the fact that they're on there, I'm not too happy about that, obviously, because they're not. I don't think we can really.
A lot of people are happy about it because I've read about it. The UN Human Rights Council, I think it has 5 or 6 of the countries that violate the human rights the most.
See, that alone is enough for me to be a bit worried. But another thing is just that Canada, I think, was also going. I think they were bidding for a spot there, and we didn't get it.
Yeah, we lost to Poland, I think.
It was Denmark. I don't remember.
No, I don't think it was Denmark.
I mean, I don't know who we lost to, but the fact that we weren't on there, come on, we're pretty cool. I think we're pretty good. We have our issues.
They're pretty good.
We have our issues, but I think if anything, any of those human rights violators should step down for one of the actual countries who respect human rights more.
We lost to Norway and Ireland.
Oh,
I mean, well, there it is.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what made you get so into these political stuff with Asian countries like China and Hong Kong and stuff? Because I wasn't aware about a lot of this. I heard it from my family once in a while, but it wasn't really until I met you that suddenly got me looking a lot more into this stuff.
Well, Canada's boring, No, I'm kidding.
It's true. Okay. Politically, Canada is actually pretty boring. This is why we always look to the U.S. whenever we want entertainment for politics.
No. So Canadian politics are not that boring. They're not. They might not be the
most exciting.
What the world won't be looking at us when we choose our next PM, but I think it's not boring. It's just we're just chill.
It's not as exciting.
There's no drama. It just happens.
I think the stakes of Canadian politics is not as high on the international scale as much as the US or Chinese or Russian.
That is true. Yeah.
And
we also don't have
UK and Brexit.
Those don't have an orange puppet, just tweeting.
We just got some guy with nice hair, nice socks.
Goes boxing, attends gay parades, pride parades.
Did blackface, the usual.
Yeah, just the normal stuff.
But returning to the question, I guess it just goes back. I think for me, it came back to the identity back when I was a kid. I kind of grew up with a lot of Caucasians. So to me, I grew up waving the 5-star flag. No hiding that. I grew up, being very proud, or not proud, but just, I was like, oh yeah, I'm Chinese. But I never knew the layers, I guess, or the differences, or that there were differences. I thought everyone spoke Canto. I didn't even know Mandarin existed until I knew about it, right? Because we all have different types of, when people say Chinese, it's depending on who you are, Chinese can mean different things. So
yeah.
When I first discovered China and Taiwan, the history, I was then suddenly, I don't seem to enjoy the communists that much. So I'm like, oh, I'm pro Taiwan. But then I realized Taiwan and Hong Kong really don't have much in common except for ideals of democracy and striving for that. Like I didn't feel connected to them as much until I learned about Hong Kong, because I also thought Hong Kong was its own country too as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Until I
so
learned
too.
it. So it wasn't, and shattered my reality. So then I was like, oh, but what's the Hong Kong story aside from the Taiwan story? And then I learned that side, and I felt like okay, but I still considered myself. I still didn't really understand how different we could be until I
Mm-hmm.
reached university. But before that, I would read up on Chinese history a lot too, and Chinese politics and whatnot, just like on Wikipedia and following the news. But then again, back then it wasn't too exciting, I guess. I don't know. But when I hit university, that's when I tried to join a lot of, I guess you could call them really fobby student groups. And I really felt the exclusion if I didn't speak Mandarin. I really felt the difference between a club where they spoke Cantonese, like a Hong Kong club, versus a Chinese, student association club or something. And the friends I made, not that they're bad people, they're actually, I really like them. It's just unfortunate that I needed a translator to hang out with them. Literally, there'd be two girls from Guangzhou or Guangdong, and they would be translating for me. I'll be like, hey, what did they say?
You're standing there just smiling with them, and you're just like, yeah, okay. So what did they say?
And my Mandarin was even worse back then. Okay, like way worse. Even mine's it's still trash right now, but it was worse then.
Do you even have any chances of speaking Mandarin?
What, back then or now?
Like right now, like is there anyone you
Yeah,
speak Mandarin with?
yeah. I try to, at least. I actually started speaking. I mean, I'm trying to learn with Shanna.
Oh, really?
And also I have a couple friends I try to learn from all the time. I catch some expressions and here and there, and I listen to I try to listen to Mandarin songs with the subtitles or lyrics, so I can at least see how words are pronounced differently and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
that's where I really found the divide, I guess, in feeling included or feeling like we are one. We are just
Mm-hmm.
like in Canto, there's mo chan mat gam when I was
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's where it began, where I was like, where I really when it was kind of set in stone, I think, where I just felt like no, like I don't think I feel any closeness or I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, belonging with these people.
Mm-hmm.
So then that's when I think my values were always the same. It's just I tried to be with them, but it didn't really work out. Um, so and then that brings me to just, and then throughout the undergrad, I studied a lot in Chinese politics, modern Chinese politics, how you know the Chinese, like from, like I said from before, like from roughly, like I learned about Chinese history, modern Chinese history up until Qing Dynasty,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Republican era, and then the Communist era. And basically, after Mao died, that's when I studied more on the modern Chinese politics of how the economy was built from the ground up.
Mhm.
And it was interesting, and it was actually really, it's a great feat. Like if you see how
Mm-hmm.
China has rivaled the U.S. now, and U.S. took what 200 years to become what it is today. Given the technology is a bit different, but 200 years versus China's like 60 since the Communist Party took over. It's not. It's an impressive feat, that's for sure, and I give credit where credit is due. But that's basically my interest there, especially to learn about China's side of the story as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually gonna ask you, right? Because, like I said, you've been very rational in terms of this topic, where, like you said, you do credit is where credit is due. So, like me and you have talked about the communism versus democracy, right? And how over here we're basically taught that communism is bad. But then
Mm-hmm.
when I talked to you about it, you said based on the governments of China, there are pros and cons to it, and you've talked about how um, there are certain aspects that would work because it's more efficient. But then obviously we've also agreed that the way that they execute those actions are things that we disagree with.
So let me just start with saying that China is not a communist country, just communist in name. So that's why it's wrong when the West is like, oh, screw communism. I mean, it's okay, so they can say that, but I think the most communist, I think, would probably be like, what, Cuba
When you see
back then?
Russia,
I don't
Yo,
even know. Russia was also quite a, like, they all became dictators. That's the thing. And that's not very communist of them, you know? Like, communism is not supposed to be, it's not
no,
supposed to
it's
have
not.
a dictatorship, right? So that's the point,
so
right?
okay, so like from what I know, like for example, like the Soviet Union and China, it was like Mao and Stalin. That was
Mm-hmm.
more of socialism and Marxism, and then it led over to like communism, dictatorship, and all that stuff. Like it evolved into that.
So the sad thing about Mao is that he's Mao and Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of the Nationalist Party, are probably both. Well, Mao is probably rolling in his grave a lot more than Chiang, and that's because um, I think I read an article which I think rings quite true, is that China now has become what Chiang Kai-shek would have wanted China to be, and that's why it's pretty shitty to be Mao, because I think he did want socialism to flourish,
He did.
Yeah.
but I think what happened after his death was anything but, well, not anything but that, but it happened a different way, and now I think this is exactly what Chiang would have wanted anyways, since during his rule both on mainland and on Taiwan, he was quite authoritarian.
Mm-hmm.
So I think right now, modern China, like right now with under the CCP, is actually quite what Chiang would have wanted anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah,
So essentially, you're basically saying they're called the Communist Party, but they're actually not like
they're not. They're
fully
not. They're
communist.
not. I mean, they opened their market. They have a highly capitalist market that may have started off with a controlled, like it was a controlled economy at first, a closed economy. But they used that to slowly transform into what the world was, and like the most WTO countries with capitalism. And the reason why they did that was that they saw a lot of countries that jumped straight from communism, like after the USSR like shattered, they jumped straight into capitalism, and that completely destroyed their economies.
Mm-hmm.
So China saw that, and they didn't want that to happen to themselves, especially because it's so massive, right? And they just
Yeah.
went through like a huge famine and everything, and Mao finally died. Good riddance. We can finally do something, new. Like they can try something new now, and that's what they did. They didn't follow what those countries did, and of course, it took time for them to recover, and now they're okay, or at least some of them are okay. But China, I would say, is in a much better place because of their planned economy coming from that. And that can be explained another time, or you can search up what planned economy is. But they started with that, and now they came to where they are. And they slowly opened up their economy to be less protectionist and open to globalized world trade. And I think that shows that they left those, at least economically speaking, they left the communist ways. And then politically speaking, they aren't communists either, because they're just a dictator, or at least a one-party dictatorship. So there really isn't with I guess some sort of party voting mechanism, but you don't really know how
Is it just
accountable they
It's
are.
just people in
Yeah,
the Communist Party voting for each other?
yeah, it just could be
Yeah.
just a yes, rubber stamp saying all in favor, and everyone raises hands, and then they
That's the
maybe
only voting that
scapegoat a
happens.
couple, all not in favor, and you see a couple raising hands, and that's it.
And then the next time you don't see those people
Yeah.
anymore.
They disappear forever.
so so yeah, like it's different. They made it very far, and I think they did a pretty good job at it. But the political development is not the best. That's why the West was happy to see them open up and adopt capitalism, liberal uh, capitalism. But the unfortunate things that they thought, and I can dare say now that they thought wrong, they thought that once they opened up, once they embraced capitalism, that they would finally have political, like with economic liberalism. They thought they would liberalize their politics as well, which means they would open up to being more democratic and listening to the people. But clearly,
Yeah.
that is not the case. They rolled out tanks in '89, and now they're just crushing people in the West, in Western China, and in Hong Kong. Unless you're like Macau, who's, you know, being a good boy.
He just sits there.
Yeah, or they point missiles at Taiwan, threatening to crush them with force if they need to. You know.
Yeah, because like I remember read or watched a video where basically I think it was like Bill Clinton. He was the one that like made a deal with China so that they'd start trading, and that was the thing that sparked like this whole China opening their economy. Because Bill Clinton wanted like he wanted to basically like move democracy into China, but then for some reason like the video was saying like how like China is the one that's kind of spreading their ways to the world instead of. Yeah.
No, I don't know much about Bill Clinton and the American side during this time, but I do agree that, you know, it was a failed attempt. If we can consider what we see now as part of the result, I would say it's a failed attempt. I would probably say it's almost like it's similar to appeasement in World War II to Germany, when they initially just let Germany grab more land in hopes that they'll stop. They'll be like, okay, you know what? Maybe they took the Rhinelands now. You know, they'll probably stop. They won't take any more if we just don't bother them and we don't tell them to stop. And you know what that led to. Not saying that this would lead to the same thing, but I would say that people who were positive and naively too positive about China opening and being liberal politically was probably a lot of political leaders at that point. So it's very obvious that China has not liberalized at all, and in fact probably regressed. If there was any progress, okay, if there was, let's just say there would be a regression since Xi Jinping just took power and basically claimed himself as Emperor Eternal there until his death.
Oh yeah, he basically claimed that.
Yeah, so yeah, that's that. So they're not communists, but like it's okay. Like people refer to them as communists, but they're not communists. They're really not communists at all, and that's why it's misleading and makes people in the West look like idiots when they're like, you know, screw communism and whatever. Like, and any reference to China as communists is kind of they're the only communist in name. That's pretty much it.
Yep.
Interesting. No, because I know like when people talk about communists, I think for example, because you know I listen to Jordan Peterson, and now you're not a huge fan of Jordan Peterson.
I'll reserve my opinion on Mr. Peterson because I haven't listened to all of his things.
That's also true.
I just have my stance on certain things I've seen based on how popular they've become. So.
Oh yeah, some of his topics have been very controversial, and you know he's garnered a lot of negative response. But he's explained a lot about like socialism, and like for him talking about socialism, he'll always refer back to Mao and Stalin and not, you know, the current China party. But yeah, I feel like a lot of people are just focusing more towards like those ideas of socialism. That's why they're against like any type of socialism here in the West too.
To be honest, Canada is quite, well, I won't say quite socialist. There's definitely countries out there more socialist than Canada, but I believe we are implementing the right socialist policies. You guys might not agree, but I think there has to be a balance struck between socialism and I don't know what's the opposite. Capitalism. But like, you know, like policies, socialist policies, I believe some are quite useful. Like our healthcare is a good one, I believe.
Yeah.
So, and to say and to talk about, you know, not loving socialism, I think socialism is actually not the threat that people are building it up to be. I believe the biggest threat, okay, and you can call me biased because it pertains to our topic, is the alternative to a democratic capitalist governance model. I think that is the real threat. Is having because what China has been doing, why they're being so successful, in my opinion, is because they're providing a model where you can have the economic power or economic I guess, progression
Mm-hmm.
of the West without having to not diversify, to give out the power to the people, i.e., democracy. They don't have to liberalize their politics to become capitalist, because before they always sold that. The West always and kept on selling the idea that capitalism and democracy went hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
But now China is, I would probably say China is one of the world powers right now, in at least in the East, and they are proving the United States and the rest of the capitalist and liberalized world as wrong, because they're basically coming up right now and they're saying, look, we're pretty badass right now, and we didn't need to liberalize our politics at all. And then they can even cite their own little, 89 on June 4th and say, they even wanted to, the people wanted to liberalize, but we stopped that and we're still good. So they're providing a different model to access the the economic prowess that the West has basically, showed off and boasted about for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And they all attribute that to liberal, or at the very least, they attribute it to doing or liberalizing their economies with their politics. But China has now shown the world that you don't need to do that, and you can still be an economic powerhouse. And that's what I believe the real threat is. The threat is the idea and the soft power of spreading an alternative where capitalism can be attained without liberalizing their politics. I think that's the real threat, not socialism. Socialism is done. It was done with communism or socialism. The threat was basically a socialist or communist state with authoritarian and maybe even protectionist economy versus a liberalized political entity with very liberalized capitalist market. That was World War II. That was the Cold War. It's done now. The real threat is everyone is taking a bite out of the capitalist market, but how you take a bite is a real fight now. So everyone can do it, but China is now saying you don't need to liberalize your politics. You don't have to have democracy. You don't have to let your people vote. You can still get it, and it doesn't really help us that they have one of the largest populations in the world and they're still kicking ass with their economy. And
Yeah, that's true.
that's why I'm saying, you can talk about how socialism is bad, but that time is done. It's I think we can actually safely integrate socialism into our liberalized democracies and our economics, at least in Canada.
Yeah,
So I don't think
yeah,
that's the threat anymore. The threat is definitely what
yeah,
China is proposing.
yeah. Because I know, like, I talked to you like a few months ago, and that was when, like, that was in the beginning where I just listened to Jordan Peterson, and then in the beginning I was like, yeah, socialism is bad, like you don't want it. But then as I listened to more, I guess quote unquote philosophers or these speakers, right? They start diving a lot more into how, like, as like Ben Shapiro, like he talks about how, like, there's a difference between, like, the socialism that happened in the past and a democratic socialism, which is basically like kind of giving enough for the people, but not to the point where, like, the people suddenly just rely on the government for everything.
Of course, I think that's the capitalist part of it. When people can and should be pushed to make something of their own as opposed to completely rely on government. But a responsible government is something that's within politics too. Is the I guess idea is that the government should be going in to help the people when they need it. They shouldn't just hold back. Right now, Hong Kong is actually the complete opposite. They're actually super capitalist, probably one of the most capitalist regions in the world, to the point where the government is so hands off that they would pour in like what, millions or billions of Hong Kong dollars to save, what was that, Ocean Park recently, instead of help the homeless. Yet they can also give out $10,000 to, or I don't know how much Hong Kong dollars, to all citizens, even the ones
10K Hong Kong.
Yeah, 10,000 Hong Kong dollars to anyone that has a Hong Kong resident card, including those out of the region, right? Which you should know because you got it. So they're rich enough to do that. Okay, the government is rich enough to do that. But that shows how capitalism. That's the weakness of capitalism. When a weakness of a government that's fully capitalist and is completely hands off, laissez-faire with the people, because they don't even help the poor. There's so much people just like picking up like garbage and You've seen them. Like, I don't even have to explain it. If you
Oh yeah,
have
yeah,
gone to Hong Kong, like there's a lot of those old ladies, elderlies who pick up cardboards to sell for a living.
yeah. There was a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, so like Hong Kong is a great example of why we need social or implement socialist policies, or else socialist policies, and to ensure that the government is a responsible government.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think socialism is only to a certain extent, right? Because even I've looked up like Marxism and all that, and a lot of Marxists do say that socialism is the first step towards communism. But then that's where like I started thinking, like, what if you start socialism, but you learn to stop it midway,
I think,
right? So, for example, it's like what Andrew Yang was trying to do before, right? Like he said, like just give $1,000 American to every family, just to help them, right? But just not enough to the point where they're gonna sit on their ass and do nothing.
yeah. So I think we have to do what China has been doing, which is taking the best parts from whichever ideology, right? So China has taken a lot of pages from capitalism, but they've taken a lot of pages from dictator books as well to keep themselves in power and whatnot. So there's benefits of that. But if we want to protect our democratic, government style, we need to take some pages from socialist or like other ideologies. We need to take pages from them, and I think it's similar to what you're saying, is that we need to know when to stop. But instead of wording it that way, I would just say, just take pages from what works in socialism and integrate it with what we have now.
Yeah.
So more socialist policies, especially the United States, because the United States is extremely much more hands off than, or at least the people are. And given the type of people they vote for, it's very obvious that they are very prone to not want to implement more socialist policies, which I think they're in dire need of. Or okay, not everyone, but the middle or lower middle class or the lower class, I think, are in dire need of that, especially with COVID crippling. Pretty much every
COVID has
economy
been
in the world.
crippling everything. Like even here in Toronto,
Yeah,
it's at a point where they're saying like even food shelters don't have enough food to feed the people who go to food shelters for food.
exactly.
Like it's getting pretty bad. That's why like because we have a friend that works for the government that she basically does like the EI stuff approval, and she's basically told me like just right now, like in this moment in time, there's a lot of people still applying for this the CRB, the Canadian Response Benefit thing for COVID, and EI, even though these people are like university students or whatever. Like everyone's just getting money. It's to the point where that's why a lot of people are against socialism, because they see this as an example, right? Like all these people are getting money monthly from the government and they're literally not doing anything. A lot of these people aren't even going back to work. They're just sitting there and just taking money from the government.
Yeah,
And this is already like one huge argument for people to go against, to basically say like we're against socialism and all that stuff. But for me, like I've been leaning more towards like I think it's fine to give families a certain amount, but not to the point that they don't have to do anything.
So I think this is more of a policy implementation problem than the policy itself being a problem. Although I don't know enough to comment, but if I had to comment, I would probably say it's just the way they implement it, and the checks and balances are simply not effective enough to deter these people.
Yeah,
I would probably say the policy itself is fine, but I would probably say like it's the implementation. It's how they check whether or not you qualify, for example. And I think
that's why, because of
issue
COVID right now,
yeah.
she said that they're not checking anything.
Exactly,
You literally just apply, they
So,
approve.
Yeah, so I think the deficits will be racking up, but you can be
it's already racking up.
Yeah, you can be sure the CRA and whatever other entities responsible for this will be coming after everyone once they have time. But then that might cost us money too to go after them. So, I don't know, man.
That's true. That's true. But basically, the last question for you is like,
We need
could
episode
you
2.
see, huh?
Probably need a part 2 of this.
Oh, we will. But like, this is like the last question for like today, because we gotta go soon. But basically, like, do you see Canada or like the US, like the West over here, being able to adopt the policies that China has in the future?
It's hard to say, and we'd have to be speaking about specific policy, which I am.
So for example, like for the things that you're saying, like the good parts of like China's government
Well,
model.
the good parts are not exactly the policies that I've been praising them. It's more of the response time. Even though the COVID response time initially was poor, but once they got the word up to once the top basically made a decision, that decision translates all the way down to the local level really fast. But that's a characteristics of a very hierarchical and top-down governance style that at its core is incompatible with democracy. So that's not something you can do in democracy. So what I'm praising China right now for is something that democracy simply cannot achieve, at least not in the style that I can see it achieve through. For example, Trudeau has to ask the provincial premiers to do the right thing. He's been heard saying that pleading to the premiers to do the right thing. You will not hear
And then
Xi
Doug Ford
plead.
is the one.
Yeah, and then
Ford is the
therefore
one
will do
that's going
whatever he
back to
wants.
Trudeau. Like, what? Yeah.
Yeah, then they because of that type, because that's inherently what or at least the division of powers and how the provinces work, and Canada being a federacy, I believe. But
I think so.
because of how our country is structured like that, it's a core thing. It's a core part of Canada, or the core part of our country that we cannot change. At least, well, we can, but it'd be messy to change that. So that particularly, I praise China, but it's not something we can really copy. That's not something we can take a page out of. Policies, I don't know which policies China implements, because there's simply so many. I personally have not studied into that in order to comment on what kind of policies we can adopt. But it's right now just based on. I mean, I'm sure you can. Imagine that having a dictatorship. When you say do this, that kind of get translates all the way to the bottom, and people just do it like that. It's not. It's not really hard to imagine why China deserves that kind of praise, or not even China, just that model, that type of model. Even because there's a lot of deliberation, there's a lot of agreements, there has to be voting and involved for democracies, but there's not much of that going on when if you really want something done in China, they just do it because that's how the system works. That's just inherently something that they have over us. Yeah. So there's no that itself I praise, but it's not something we can take a page out of. At least I can't see that happening for us. Even like you can clearly see with COVID, like Trudeau has to ask the premiers, but you don't see Xi asking anyone. He just does.
She just does it.
Yeah, he just says A, and everyone's like, "All right, A," and then A goes up from top to bottom real quick. So, but that's just
says A. Dougie
Doug's
just
like,
says,
I don't know, man. I don't know. Like, we don't need to do A. So then, like, we can see why. That's just inherently how it works. But I'm sure if we looked into some policies that China enacts, I'm sure we can find some that might work. But honestly, it's just China is not a socialist country. So there is not much we can learn in terms of socialist policies. But there is some, I'm sure, that we can take from them. But I just don't know which.
I think it's because
China
China doesn't have to deal with race issues. They don't need to deal with LGBTQ stuff. They don't really have to deal with a lot of stuff. It's literally just their people, and that's it.
I think politically and socially, China has not liberalized. So I do believe that is it does make it. Let's just say that they have a table that's more clear. We have a lot of issues on our table, from political to social to economical. These are all issues that we have on our table in Canada. But then for China, they would probably really only they can have whatever issue they want. Really, they can decide to never talk about politics again, ever. Even if the people raise it. But so the issue, the difference is that we listen to the people, and because we have so much people talking about so many things, which is a great thing about democracy, we get to hear everyone's opinion. We have to like all of that gets thrown on the table, and you don't even see the table. You're so busy, so much papers, you don't see the table. But China, you can see the table, or you cannot see the table. You can do and prioritize and do whatever you want when you want. And when I say you, I mean the party, obviously. So there's still deliberation within the party, but largely they are one. So they can take off issues. They don't, if they don't want to talk about LGBTQ plus issues, they don't have to talk about it, and they don't. They don't comment on it. They don't enact laws. They don't, I don't know, sponsor pride parades. I don't know. They don't do any of those things, and the companies, the businesses in there, they also don't give a shit. They do what people give a shit about, and people, I guess, frankly, they don't really give a shit about that there. So it's okay
because they just want to get shit done.
Yeah, so it's just it's culturally different too. So you gotta remember that too.
Yeah. Well, this was a very interesting and educational talk from Mr. Anthony Ho here today. Again, he has been known. He's been called the sympathizer for China, but he has valid reasons.
I am a CCP sympathizer. Yeah.
But he has good reasons and rational logic behind his reasonings for complimenting certain things that China has done.
It's just, credit where credit's due,
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you. There is probably going to be a part 2 and part 3 and so on.
Yeah, because we didn't even get to the national security law.
Yeah, whenever we get back into it.
Yeah, whenever.
Oh yeah,
COVID
get back
time.
to it.
COVID. It's COVID. It's fine. There's plenty of time.
Yeah, it's COVID right now. I'll probably see you guys like in person, like in 2020.
I'll see you guys in the third wave of COVID.
Third wave? We're already kind of...
Oh yeah, there's definitely going to be a third wave.
With how we're doing stuff, I don't know, man. Or maybe we'll ride the second wave so far that we won't need
that there won't be a third.
Yeah,
it's just going to just keep going second wave nonstop.
Yeah, who knows?
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Would the second wave be a tsunami?
Huh?
Would the second wave just be a tsunami?
This is a tsunami.
Okay.
See you guys when the cases reach 6,500 here in Ontario.
All right, see you guys soon.
Oh, shit.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks for listening to the Sadboi Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and have a nice day, I guess.
Yeah, stay sad or happy.
Sad? Happy.
Sad, happy.
Sadboi.
Sadboi Podcast.
Sadboi Podcast. Good night.